46 years ago today, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. All 29 crew members aboard died.
The SS Edmund Fitzgerald is a name that means mystery. But the mystery just got deeper. A new, state-of-the-art dive just penetrated the wreck, exploring the one place nobody has ever seen in detail: the bridge. And what they found has experts scrambling for answers. It's an anomaly that simply should not exist.
We are holding our own.
This isn't just about a sinking anymore. This is about an impossible scene, frozen in time, that changes the entire narrative. What was found on that bridge? You won't believe the answer. The Bridge of Silence. The surface of Lake Superior is a dark, rolling expanse of black water. It's a cold, unforgiving place known to sailors as a freshwater sea that holds its secrets tightly. 530 feet below this restless surface, in a world of absolute darkness and crushing pressure, lies the most famous ghost on the Great Lakes, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. For nearly half a century, the wreck has been a gravesite, a place of mystery, speculation, and profound sorrow. We all know the legend: a 729-foot freighter, the biggest of its day, loaded with 26,000 tons of iron ore. A monstrous storm with hurricane-force winds and waves the size of office buildings. And then, silence. Vanished from radar. No mayday, no distress call, no survivors, just 29 families left with a question that would never be answered. Until now. You see, a new expedition armed with technology that sounds like science fiction just did what was once thought impossible. They didn't just find the wreck, they performed a digital autopsy. Using a state-of-the-art remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, this team of marine archaeologists and engineers didn't just scan the mangled steel, they went inside. Their target? The nerve center of the ship. The one place that could hold the key to those final silent moments. The pilot house, the bridge. The tension in the RO-5 control room, a small dark space aboard the research vessel, was thick enough to cut with a knife. On the screens, the drone's powerful lights cut through the murky abyss. The wreck loomed out of the gloom, a colossal, sleeping giant covered in rust and sediment. The bow section is upright, plowed deep into the lake bed, a testament to the violence of its final plunge. The pilot, his hands steady on the controls, navigated the million-dollar drone toward the shattered windows of the pilot house. This was delicate work. To put it mildly, this is like performing surgery in the dark, miles from a hospital, with a robot. The ROV is barely the size of a golf cart, but it's equipped with high-definition cameras, sonar, and delicate thrusters to hold it steady in the deep lake currents. The drone slipped past the jagged edges of a window frame. And then, they were in. The control room operators leaned in, their faces lit only by the glow of the monitors. What they saw made the hair on their arms stand up. This was the impossible anomaly. The bridge was calm. It was a scene of eerie, terrifying peace. The thing nobody tells you about shipwrecks is the chaos, the violence. You expect to see controls smashed, equipment hurled across the room, and evidence of a final desperate fight for survival. There was none of it. The ship's telegraph, the polished brass control used to signal engine speed to the crew below, was still standing. Its handle was pushed all the way forward to full ahead. The radar console, though dark, was intact. The gyro compass, the ship's main navigational tool, sat in its housing. At the front of the bridge, the master's wheel, the helm, was undamaged, as if waiting for Captain McSorley's hands. And then the camera panned to the side. There, sitting in a metal holder bolted to the wall, was a coffee mug. A simple ceramic coffee mug, right where a crewman had left it. It had survived a disaster so violent it tore a 700-foot ship in two, yet here it was, perfectly preserved. This was the Anomaly, a ship that sank in a storm with 35-foot waves and 70-mile-per-hour winds. Yet the bridge looked as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. There was no sign of panic, no sign of a struggle. It was impossible. How could a ship be torn apart by the lake, yet the bridge remain a frozen picture of normality? This single discovery shattered decades of theories. It proved the crew never saw it coming. They didn't fight the storm and lose. They were, in all likelihood, sailing at full speed, completely unaware that they were just seconds from disaster. The anomaly on the bridge wasn't the answer, it was a new, more terrifying question. If the catastrophe didn't happen on the bridge, what was happening under it? The team knew they had to look deeper. This calm scene was a lie, hiding a violent truth. More than just a freighter. To understand why that calm bridge is so terrifying, you first have to understand the ship itself. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald wasn't just a ship, she was the ship. When she was launched in 1958, she was a true marvel. Christened in front of a crowd of over 15,000 people, she was, at 729 feet long, the largest vessel on the Great Lakes. A record she held for 13 years. They didn't just call her a freighter, they called her the Queen of the Lakes. And queen was the right word. What many overlooked is that the Fitz was built for more than just work. She was a symbol of American industrial might, built by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. She was, in fact, named after the company's president. And she was built with luxury in mind. This wasn't your average rusty ore boat. The Fitzgerald had opulent guest quarters. We're talking thick carpets, wood-paneled lounges, and a dedicated chef for passengers. Company executives and their families would take summer cruises on her, enjoying fine dining while watching the sunset over the lakes. She was the pride of the American side, a beautiful, powerful, and everyone assumed safe ship. She even had a nickname. To the crews, she was affectionately known as Big Fitz. She was a record setter. In 1964, she became the first ship to carry more than 1 million tons of iron ore through the Sulaks locks in a single season. The wow factor of this ship was off the charts. Below decks, she was all business. Her massive cargo hold, divided by 2 massive bulkheads, could carry over 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore pellets. That's the weight of over 4,000 elephants. Her 7,500 horsepower steam turbine engine could push her across the lakes at over 16 miles per hour, making her not only the biggest, but one of the fastest lakers in the fleet. She set records, hauling more cargo in a single season than any ship before her. In her 17-year career, she made over 700 trips, hauling millions of tons of ore to the steel mills of Detroit and Toledo. She was a workhorse, a legend, and in the minds of many, she was unsinkable. Her captain, Ernest McSorley, was just as legendary. At 63 years old, he was one of the most experienced and respected masters on the lakes. He was a quiet, professional man who knew these waters better than he knew his own backyard. He had been sailing for 44 years, and this trip in November of 1975 was supposed to be one of his last before a well-deserved retirement. The crew were all professionals, 29 men in total, fathers, sons, and brothers. From seasoned veterans to young cadets on their first real voyage, they were the best. So you have the biggest, fastest, most luxurious ship, a veteran captain, and a professional crew. They had faced November storms before. These gales, known as the Witch of November, are notorious on the lakes, but it was just part of the job. When the Fitzgerald left port in Superior, Wisconsin on November 9, 1975, the weather forecast was bad but not catastrophic. It was just another trip, but not all things are what they seem. This storm was different, and the Fitzgerald, for all its strength and glory, had a hidden weakness. A fatal flaw that until that new drone dive, no one had ever been able to prove. The Titan of the Lakes was sailing into a perfect trap, but the Queen had a secret, a weakness nobody saw. The lake that never gives up, it's dead. The storm that gathered over the Central Plains on November 9th wasn't just a storm, it was a weather bomb. The technical term is explosive cyclogenesis. To put it simply, it was a winter hurricane that was about to spin itself up and unleash hell directly over Lake Superior. The Edmund Fitzgerald was steaming east, loaded heavy with iron ore, running alongside another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson. Captain McSorley of the Fitzgerald and Captain Bernie Cooper of the Anderson were in regular radio contact, partners in the storm, agreeing to take a northern route to try and find some shelter from the building waves. But there was no shelter. By the morning of November 10th, the situation had deteriorated. The winds were screaming at over 50 knots, that's nearly 60 miles per hour. But the real problem was the waves. The lake, with its long fetch, an unobstructed stretch of water for the wind to blow over, was building waves that were routinely hitting 25 feet. And then there were the rogue waves, monsters that could tower over 35 feet. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, Captain McSorley radioed the Anderson with the first sign of trouble. His voice was calm, but the words were serious. He reported that the Fitz was taking on water. He'd lost 2 radar antennas ripped from the ship by the wind, and most critically, he said he had a bad list. The ship was tilting to one side. He also mentioned that 2 of his ballast tank vents had been carried away. Still, there was no panic. McSorley was a veteran. He slowed his ship down to let the Anderson catch up, seeking the safety of numbers. The thing nobody tells you about these storms is the noise. It's not just wind, it's a deafening physical roar. The sound of steel groaning under pressure, of waves exploding against the hull like cannon fire. Visibility was almost zero, a blinding mess of snow and lake spray. Through the afternoon, the 2 ships battled on. The Anderson's crew watched in horror as the Fitzgerald, just a few miles ahead, would at times completely disappear from view, buried between 2 massive waves. Then it would climb the next crest, bow rising high, before plunging back down. Around 7 to 10 p.m., the Anderson radioed the Fitzgerald one last time to give a warning about an oncoming ship. The radio operator on the Anderson asked McSorley how they were doing. McSorley's reply would become the most famous, haunting words in Great Lakes history. His voice, still calm, still professional, came back across the static. "We are holding our own. We are holding our own." 10 minutes later, the Anderson's radar operator looked at his screen. The small blip that was the Edmund Fitzgerald was gone. It didn't fade. It didn't flicker. It was just gone. Captain Cooper of the Anderson tried to raise him on the radio. "Fitzgerald, this is the Anderson. Have you got her?" Silence. "Fitzgerald, this is the Anderson. Do you read me?" More silence. The Anderson was the first to know. The largest, most powerful ship on the lakes had been swallowed by the storm without so much as a whisper. No mayday, no flares, no lifeboats. The ship and its 29 crewmen were gone. The lake had claimed its prize. But how? That single question would create a dark industry of speculation, theories, and arguments that would last for almost 50 years. The ship was gone, leaving only questions and wild theories. A universe of unknowns. When search crews finally located the wreck 4 days later, the discovery only deepened the mystery. The Edmund Fitzgerald was not in one piece. She was lying in 2 large, mangled sections, 530 feet down in Canadian waters. The bow section, as the drone just revisited, was sitting upright in the mud. The stern section, holding the ship's massive engines, was 200 feet away, flipped upside down and shredded like a tin can. Between them was a vast debris field of twisted steel and spilled taconite ore. A ship built to withstand the worst of the lakes had been broken in half. But how? You see, in the absence of survivors, theories began to fly, and for decades everyone had a different answer. The first major theory was shoaling. This idea proposed that the Fitzgerald, already listing and low in the water, had scraped the bottom on a treacherous, poorly marked reef known as the 6-Fathom Shoal near Caribou Island. The idea was that this impact tore a gash in the hull, allowing water to pour in. The problem? No dive, not even the most recent one, has ever found evidence of bottoming out damage on the hull. The second theory was structural failure. This was a big one. The NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, argued that the ship, riding between 2 massive waves, was left suspended with its bow and stern in the air and its middle unsupported. The stress was too much and the keel snapped. Pop! The ship broke in half on the surface, ending the crew in seconds. This would be a violent, sudden end. This theory was countered by the official U.S. Coast Guard report. They had a different idea, one that was far more controversial at the time. The Coast Guard pointed the finger not at the lake, but at the ship itself. They argued that the hatch covers, the flat steel lids on top of the cargo hold, were not properly secured. What many overlooked is that these covers were held down by a series of 68 hand-tightened clamps. The Coast Guard believed that in the violent storm, these clamps had failed, allowing waves to wash over the deck and pour into the cargo hold, a process called flooding. The problem with this theory? It implied crew negligence. It suggested Captain McSorley and his men had failed to batten down the hatches. The sailors' unions and the families of the crew were, to put it mildly, outraged. They insisted the crew was professional and would never have made such a simple, fatal mistake. And then there was the most dramatic theory, the Three Sisters rogue waves. The crew of the Anderson reported being hit by two, then a third massive wave, far larger than all the others. This wave buried the Anderson in water, and it's the one many believe struck the Fitzgerald moments later. This single catastrophic wave, the theory goes, was the coup de grace, the final blow that pushed the already damaged ship under. But the thing nobody tells you is that the official theories are just the beginning. The Fitzgerald mystery is so deep it has attracted a wilder set of ideas. Many people are crazy about these. Let's talk about the Great Lakes Triangle. Just like the Bermuda Triangle, Lake Superior has its own graveyard. This stretch of water is infamous for ships that have vanished without a trace. The Bannockburn, the Inkerman, the Sarasols. The Fitzgerald is just the most famous. Was it a curse? A strange window area? Some believe this part of the lake is a portal, and the Fitz was simply its latest victim. Then there's the UFO connection. You see, Lake Superior is a hotbed for unidentified flying object sightings. The mysterious Paulding Light in Michigan, visible near the lake, has baffled scientists for decades. What if the Fitzgerald saw something it shouldn't have? Some theories propose that a powerful light from an unknown source scrambled their electronics, which would explain the loss of radar and radio. This fits the no distress call part of the story perfectly. Here's an even wilder one. A secret submarine. This was 1975, the height of the Cold War. The Great Lakes are connected to the ocean. What if a Soviet sub or even a secret US sub was testing in the deep fresh water? A collision would be instant. It would tear the ship in two, and it would explain the government's quiet handling of the wreck. It sounds crazy, but at the time, people were willing to believe anything. But perhaps the most compelling wild theory is a magnetic anomaly. The Fitzgerald was carrying 26,000 tons of iron ore, sailing over a lake bed known to be rich in iron. What if a bizarre, concentrated magnetic field scrambled their compasses? This would explain the anomaly on the bridge. The crew, calm and professional, would be at full ahead, thinking they were on course, but their instruments would be lying. They could have been sailing blind, straight into the eye of the storm, or worse, toward the dangerous shoals. For decades, these theories, from the logical to the outlandish, were all anyone had. But the new drone footage just bypassed all of them. The smoking gun at 500 feet. Leaving the haunting silence of the pilot house, the ROV pilot guided the drone back out into the blackness. The mission shifted. If the bridge was calm, the disaster must have come from somewhere else. The team's new target was the main deck, specifically the 21 massive cargo hatch covers that sealed the ship. This is where the mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald was finally and definitively solved. The original 1977 Coast Guard report had suspected hatch failure, but the new drone footage, captured in stunning 4K clarity, proved it. As the drone's light scanned the first hatch combing, the raised metal lip the cover sits on, the engineers in the control room saw it. Then they saw it again, and again. The clamps. The heavy-duty, manually fastened steel clamps that were supposed to hold the hatch covers down against the sea were gone. This wasn't just one or two loose clamps. On multiple hatches, the drone's cameras revealed clamps that were twisted, bent backward, or sheared off entirely. The footage was so clear you could see the stress fractures in the steel. The Fitzgerald hadn't just faced a storm, it had been systematically and violently pulled apart. But the thing nobody tells you is that it gets worse. The team then navigated the drone to the front of the ship where Captain McSorley had reported losing 2 ballast vents. The drone found the location, and the damage was catastrophic. It wasn't just that the vent covers were gone, the entire vent pipes, solid steel structures, had been ripped clean off the deck, leaving gaping 4-inch wide holes leading directly into the ballast tanks, and by extension, the cargo hold. The engineers on the surface began running calculations, and the numbers they came up with were sickening. With multiple hatch clamps failing and giant open vent pipes, the Fitzgerald wasn't just taking on water, it was swallowing the lake. Computer models based on the new footage estimated that water could have been pouring into the cargo hold at a rate of over 4,000 gallons per minute. That's the equivalent of a standard swimming pool filling up every 10 minutes. This discovery is the key. It explains everything. It explains the bad list McSorley reported. The ship was filling with water, but slowly, invisibly. It explains why McSorley was so calm. The flooding wasn't happening on the bridge or in the engine room, it was happening deep inside the dark cargo hold under thousands of tons of ore. There were no flood alarms for the cargo hold on a ship of that design. He had no way of knowing, and it explains the impossible anomaly on the bridge. The Fitzgerald didn't break in half on the surface. It didn't get hit by a single rogue wave and explode. It drowned. The bow of the ship, filling with thousands of tons of water and ore slurry, became incredibly heavy. It began to nosedive, pulling the rest of the ship down with it. The crew on the bridge, at full ahead, would have felt the bow dip. They would have fought the wheel, thinking they were just plowing into another big wave. But this time, the ship didn't come back up. The bow plunged under the waves, and the incredible forward momentum of the ship, combined with the extreme stress, tore the vessel in half. It was a silent, catastrophic failure. The men on the bridge were likely still at their stations, unaware of the fatal flaw until the very last second when the windows imploded and the lake itself ripped them away. They never had time to grab a life vest. They never had time to send a mayday. They were, as their captain said, holding their own until they weren't. The mystery wasn't a monster, it was a design flaw. The truth was colder and more tragic than any legend. The lake keeps its secrets. The drone's findings don't just close a 50-year-old case, they open up a new and in many ways more disturbing conversation. For decades, the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald was treated like a mythical event, a force of nature, an act of God. The Witch of November. Gordon Lightfoot's haunting song turned the tragedy into a timeless, romantic ghost story. But the truth, revealed by this new technology, is far colder and more brutal. The Fitzgerald wasn't taken by a monster from a wild theory. It wasn't zapped by aliens or pulled into a time warp. It was the victim of a system, a victim of its own design. What many overlooked is that these Lakers were built for one purpose: to haul as much cargo as possible, as fast as possible. They were workhorses, and they were pushed hard. The hatch system with its manual clamps was a design from an earlier era. It was a system that relied on every single clamp being perfectly maintained and perfectly tightened every single time. In a storm of that magnitude, with waves flexing the entire 700-foot length of the ship like a rubber band, those clamps were the only thing keeping the lake out. And they failed. The new evidence terrifies experts because it proves how vulnerable these ships were. The Fitzgerald wasn't unique. There were dozens of other ships on the lakes with the exact same design. The thing is, this disaster wasn't an anomaly at all. It was, as one marine engineer put it, an accident waiting to happen. This new discovery, this smoking gun from the cargo hold, finally, after 50 years, absolves Captain McSorley and his crew. The anomaly on the bridge, that impossible calm, that coffee cup, is their final testimony. They did their jobs. They were professionals. They fought the storm they could see, unaware of the silent, fatal enemy that was creeping in from below. The 29 men on board weren't lost to a myth. They were lost to fractured steel, to outdated designs, and to a system that hadn't yet learned the brutal lessons of the lake. In the years after the disaster, maritime laws were changed. New rules mandated enclosed lifeboats, survival suits for crews, and most importantly, flood detection alarms in cargo holds. The loss of the Fitzgerald, in a tragic way, ended up saving countless other lives. The Edmund Fitzgerald is no longer a mystery. It's a warning, a 500-foot deep reminder that no matter how big we build our machines, the sea, even a freshwater sea, is always bigger. The thing is, we think this happens overnight, that this is some grand event. But the Fitzgerald teaches us that disasters often happen slowly, quietly, and in ways we aren't even looking for. Are we missing a key detail in other parts of our lives? This story proves that the most terrifying disasters aren't the ones that come with a loud bang, but the ones that come with a silent, deadly quiet, just like the one on the bridge. The lake has finally told its story. But does knowing the truth make the loss of the 29 men better, or does it make it worse, knowing it was preventable? Let us know what you think in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the deep.